Tim Drake Robin, the forgotten Robin, probably never going to go anywhere in comic books, but let's be honest, it was always going to be very, very, very difficult to get Tim Drake Robin over like they have with a Dick Grayson or even a Jason Todd, or even, quite frankly, and I hate to admit this, even a Damian Wayne. There are a lot of things that were in the way of Tim Drake that were holding him back, and there's recently an article, I believe it's on CBR.com, I believe it's CBR, talking about how DC can fix Tim Drake Robin, and it is one of the most delusional fucking articles I've ever read in my entire life. Not once, and there's probably 14 paragraphs in this sumbitch, does it ever mention that DC Comics did an out-of-nowhere sexuality swap on Tim Drake, changing him into being the gay Robin, which is what he is now. And that is the one reason why they will never be allowed to fix Tim Drake Robin. They won't fix him because he has to remain what he has been now and what he's become, even though we already had lots of hurdles over him. One of the most delusional takes I've ever seen in my entire life. Look what happened to Bobby Drake. And Bobby Drake Iceman was far more popular and important to Marvel Comics and the X-Men than Tim Drake Robin ever was. Look what happened to that character once you did that to him. Did Tim Drake Robin ever stand a chance with what Megan Fitzmartin and Riley Rossmo did to the character? Absolutely not. But let's go through this in some of the insane takes by, I can't remember the guy's names. It might be Maxwell. I can't remember at this point. He starts out, one of Batman's closest allies and the third person to take on the mantle of Robin, Tim Drake, has struggled in recent years to connect with readers and find his place in the DC Comics universe. Fans feel the character has been stagnant, lacking opportunities to grow and evolve, and that's just the start of DC's Tim Drake problems. Au contraire, mon frere, there have actually been quite a few changes with Tim Drake over the past 5 years, which isn't a long period of time when it comes to comic books. DC Comics have been out for over 80 years. A 5-year period is relatively recent in DC Comics time, and they've made multiple changes to the character. Most significantly, they did retcon his sexuality, despite the fact that Tim Drake had only ever been interested in female characters and had a long-standing relationship with, spoiler, another Robin in the DC Comics mythos and pantheon. And they had been together for many, many years, but 5 years ago, he wasn't Tim Drake Robin, he was Tim Drake Red Robin, and then he became Tim Drake Drake, and now he's back to being Tim Drake Robin again, where he started out from. So there have been changes, and they've tried to elevate the character. In fact, if you haven't noticed, or you didn't notice, I guess, James Tynion did his damnedest. Everything in his arsenal that he could pull out, he did to make Tim Drake a prominent figure within the Batman family, specifically during his Detective Comics run. Unfortunately, he is Tim Drake Robin. He's not the very first Robin like Dick Grayson, who obviously is now Nightwing. He's not the second Robin that obviously had a negative outcome when it comes to Joker obviously dying and then coming back as the Red Hood. And then now he's kind of been overshadowed by another Robin that we'll get to here in the not too distant future. But DC Comics actually have made quite a few changes over the last few years, whether it be his name, trying to elevate the character with James Tynion. And certainly, I would say the sexuality reveal was not stagnant. I think that was a character altering change. Unfortunately, it was for the negative, but they forget to mention that here. Until 2006, Tim Drake was the DC Universe's only active Robin. Batman's former proteges had moved on to their own mantles and carved out their own places in the DC landscape. This left Tim Drake by Batman's side as his partner and ally in the never-ending fight against crime in Gotham City, until Damian Wayne appeared on the scene. First appearing as Robin in Batman 657, Damian is the son of the villainous Talia al Ghul and the Caped Crusader himself. The emergence of this new Robin added an exciting dynamic to Batman's ongoing stories. However, it soon became apparent that Tim Drake was being pushed to the sidelines. And I do believe there are many reasons for this. When you look at the characters and the way that they interact and differentiate themselves from Bruce Wayne, Dick Grayson is a character not like born in trauma that's constantly trying to overcome the death of his parents, kind of like a Batman. He is a character that has embraced humanity and all the goodness in it while also realizing there are bad people out there and is always fighting because he wants to help people, not because he's so traumatized that he's trying to get over something. Dick Grayson is literally the best of all of us. He is the best member of the Batman family. He's the one character that everyone looks up to because he is like a beacon of virtue. Does that mean he's perfect? Absolutely not. But he's pretty darn close, and that does differentiate him from Batman. Jason Todd was very, very, very similar, too similar to Dick Grayson at the beginning. They changed his origin. They tweaked it a little bit. Then as he was growing older, he became more defiant to Batman. And obviously we get into Death in the Family, where Jason Todd is killed off because of the vote, and whether or not that was legit or not, is a story unto itself. But then he comes back as a hard-charging vigilante that has no rules against guns, that has no rules against killing, that has a major league grudge with Batman. You get Under the Red Hood, which is a fantastic story, absolutely great Batman story. And you get a major league differentiation between Jason Todd and Dick Grayson, and certainly Bruce Wayne Batman himself, that he's more vengeful, he's more violent, and more prone to killing people. When you look at what Tim Drake brings to the table, he's very, very, very similar to Bruce Wayne himself, other than the fact that he doesn't have that trauma. He chose to become Robin of his own free will. He figured out who Batman was, wanted to become a Robin, but he's really steeped in like detective work and things of that nature. Batman really already brings that to the table. Tim Drake doesn't bring, when it comes to the Batman family, people are going to be mad at me about this, but that's okay. He doesn't bring as much uniqueness as a Dick Grayson or a Jason Todd, the way that they were evolved over time, or even a Damian Wayne, who was raised, despite being Batman's biological son, was raised with the Al Ghul family, and under that legacy to be like this great vengeful warrior for them that was basically going to burn the entire world down. That was what his destiny was going to be, and obviously that's altered. Now he's with Bruce Wayne, Batman, his father. So Damian brings something very personal because he's the actual biological son of Batman. The others aren't. And also, he's got a lot of pride to himself, an enormous amount of hubris. He thinks he's better, really, than his own father. And really the only character in the entire DC universe that he respects, maybe outside of John Kent, is Dick Grayson. And that's one of the things that makes Dick Grayson great, and why I think a lot of people like Nightwing. He doesn't even have a rogues gallery. People love him. Because not only does like Batman respect him, Damian respects him, Superman respects him, everybody kinds of respects him. And it's not because the writers push that on. They're like, what the best way to elevate Dick Grayson is if we had Superman say, I kind of like that guy. It just kind of played that way out, the way that he was evolved as a character, and everybody, including the readers, kind of likes him. And that has left Tim Drake in the wayside. And it's been that way for a long time, specifically since the introduction of Damian Wayne, because he was, in some parts, but not all the way, very redundant. And now he's just the gay Robin. That's the only thing that differentiates him. But that's not enough to make a full-fledged character for people to really invest in. In fact, when you've had a character that's been around for 35 years or something like that, and then you make a change like that, that actually gives them a reason to walk away and no longer invest in him. It kind of turned out the exact opposite way that DC Comics wanted. What would benefit Tim Drake most is for DC to take him out of the Bat family's immediate orbit and give him his own spotlight. Like Nightwing, perhaps he could even be assigned his own city to protect, or at least his own portion of Gotham. Tim Drake deserves the space and distance from Batman to fully grow into his own character. Separating Tim from the Bat family would also give writers the opportunity to develop a strong supporting cast and rogues gallery for Tim, something he's sorely lacking. Tim Drake needs to move beyond being one of the Robins and instead become his own man, his own hero. And what the writer of this article is immediately forgetting is they tried to do that recently. Megan Fitzmartin, the writer that decided that Tim Drake needed to be gay because we needed gay representation in the Bat family, even though Kate Kane, Batwoman is already there, got to have a gay male character as well. They gave him his own portion of the city. They gave him the docks. Although after reading Alan Scott, the Green Lantern, maybe that wasn't like the nicest thing to do. It's got some weird connotations about it that I was apparently unaware of at the time. But they gave him his own area of the city to protect. They gave him his own new rogues gallery, and they gave him his own supporting cast led by Bernard, his now boyfriend. And they even aged the character down. All of a sudden, instead of being in his 20s, he looked like he was 15, which was really weird and kind of groomerish. But then Riley Rossmo, an artist I don't like, although what he's doing right now with The Moon is Following Us looks much better, should never illustrate superheroes again, like somehow turned him, despite the character being full-fledged gay now, turned him into like Twinkle Toes Robin, to where he was actually prancing around the page. Do you know how difficult it is to illustrate a character like prancing? And Riley Rossmo pulled it off like without any effort whatsoever. He was just prancing everywhere. He was like Twinkle Toes. He only walked on like his tippy toes and stuff. It was really, really strange. And it didn't help the character. In fact, it made it worse. If anything, he needs to be back in the Bat family, forget about all the shit that she added to the character, and get him back to being a superhero again. Because what happens when you make a character gay and you move him down to the dock side? 95% of the book is about he and his boyfriend like going out and talking to the neighbors, or what's going on with the dogs or the cats, or where are we going to have dinner? And that's what the book devolved into. So they tried to do this. They gave him his very own section of Gotham. They gave him his very own supporting cast, and they were all wacky, weird people living around the docks and all that stuff in the Megan Fitzmartin, Tim Drake Robin series. And it did nothing but hurt the character, because he can only be defined by one characteristic now. He's not even a detective anymore. They don't even mention that. It's almost never even demonstrated in the course of a Tim Drake story, whether it's in Batman Detective Comics, obviously his own ongoing series. Obviously, we knew it was always going to be a miniseries. Like, he doesn't do detective work anymore. He could only be the gay Robin. Although I will admit, was it, I think it was Chip Zdarsky early on, did feature Tim Drake, and they mentioned that he had a boyfriend once or something like that. But for the most part, he was just backing up Batman. And that would be the actual way to rehab the character, is to mind wipe the stupid changes that you made and see if you can actually make something out of the character, even though it will be very, very difficult because he doesn't stand out in the crowd of Robins that are out there. Bringing characters like Spoiler, Bernard Dowd, and even some of Tim Drake's former Young Justice teammates into his solo series would keep him connected to the larger DC universe while allowing him to flourish on his own. These familiar faces could serve as anchors for Tim, preserving the core of his character while leaving room for him to meet new people, forge new relationships, and face fresh challenges. As I said, they already did this when they went down the docks, but you bring up Spoiler and Bernard. Absolutely, he was with Spoiler for a very long time. He was in a relationship with her for like a decade. I think it was longer than that. They were together as boyfriend and girlfriend. And once again, Megan Fitzmartin, who can't help but shitting the bed, goes out and does that like Tim Drake Pride special where they reprinted all the backup stories with him coming out and all that kind of stuff, and then added a few pages at the end where Spoiler meets Bernard for the first time. When Tim Drake at this point, is the love of her life, and he's left her, and now that he's with a dude, and she's like, oh my goodness, it's Bernard. I fucking want to hug you. You're the greatest person ever. And you're like, oh wait, great. You just killed off the one big conflict that you could fucking have in your story that might actually get people somewhat interested. How is he going to explain this to Spoiler? How is Spoiler going to react to this? Of course she's not going to like Bernard at first. Is he going to be able to win her over? And you could have some of that slice of life stuff that you could have as a B and C plot in there, and they immediately throw it out the window because Spoiler couldn't be upset that her gay boyfriend that was with her for 10 years and fucking led her on the entire time is actually with another dude. That wouldn't upset a woman at all. That wouldn't make her think about her inadequacies or how she feels about any of this stuff. Of course she'd want to be best friends with the guy. So you actually had a chance to have a somewhat interesting subplot in there, and it never even happened. It's almost like when they did the Bobby Drake thing. One day, you're sitting there, you're like, one day, Bobby Drake is going to have to confront Jean Grey, be like, hey, why the fuck did you do this to me? I was straight for like 40 years. I got all this history. I've been banging chicks left and right this entire time. And then you went in my head because you're, a telepath or whatever, and you made me gay. When is he ever actually going to, bring this up to her? And I think it finally happened in like a Cena Gray's Iceman special type thing where there was like ice golems and stuff. And they didn't even play it out right. He wasn't even mad. Like, oh yeah, I guess it happened. Like, because you're not allowed to have that kind of conflict with a gay character. You're not allowed to have anybody actually, go up there and challenge them in the decisions that they made and the way that they treated people over the years, because they're not allowed to be real people anymore. And that's really the big problem. And you're like, oh yeah, let's get in Spoiler and Bernard and, some of those Young Justice members. Yeah, I'll throw Ginny Hex in there or Teen Lantern. That's really going to fucking move the needle. Of course it's not. If you want to move the needle with Tim Drake, he's got to be a part of the Bat family. But you can't put him in there with the Bat family, because if you do put him in an issue, you have to have all the other Robins come in like, dude, you're so gay and I love it. I want to go to a pride celebration with you because I'm so amazed at how stunning and brave you are now that you like to smoke cock. That's the way they have to treat the character, but nobody wants to write that story that's actually a good writer. Like, that's fucking boring. I would like some challenges on here. Why can't anyone ever, talk about these things like they're real people? But you're not allowed to do that with Tim Drake anymore because he's a gay character now. And that's what's really holding him back, besides the fact that he's one of many Robins and the least interesting one, probably. Both DC Comics and Tim Drake fans often seem to believe that giving Tim a new code name is the solution to revitalizing the character. That simply isn't the case. The issue runs much deeper than that, and past attempts to simply rename or slightly tweak his direction have already proven insufficient to satisfy fans. It doesn't matter if Tim Drake continues operating under the Robin name. Superhero mantles can and should be shared. If Tim Drake is given his own voice and opportunities to grow into a fully realized, unique character, fans won't mind him sharing the Robin mantle with Damian Wayne. So first off, I take complete umbrage with the idea that superhero mantles can and should be shared. They absolutely should not be shared. Superhero mantles should be unique. Superhero power sets should be unique. The origin stories should be unique. That's one of the reasons that Jason Todd was initially rejected, because he was way too similar to the very first Robin. And eventually he became the Red Hood, but something very tragic had to happen that really diverged him off of that original, kind of Dick Grayson path that he was kind of following down. They should not be sharing mantles. There shouldn't be two Robins. Was Red Robin enough to differentiate him? I think it probably was. And I really like the wings and stuff like that. Was Drake a good name? Absolutely not. Drake was a terrible name. It's his last fucking name. Not exactly a code name. Not exactly keeping your identity secret. Really, really stupid stuff. But Brian Michael Bendis was completely spent goods at that time. He had nothing new or creative to do at DC Comics, which I think played out in all the comic books he wrote. But when he says, Tim Drake needs the opportunity to grow into a fully realized, unique character, he can't have that opportunity because Tim Drake is the gay Robin now. Get that through your head. He could never be anything else. He is a Pride variant cover model now. He comes out once a year in mass around Pride to do a one-shot anthology story or whatever. Maybe somebody will do something else in another, Pride book or something. But that's literally all he can do anymore. You are not allowed to make him a fully realized, unique character. He can only be a caricature of whatever it is that entertainment and comic books have accepted as being the only version of a gay character that's allowed in the medium. That's why they're all the exact same. This isn't anything really against gay characters. There have been plenty of gay characters in the past that people have liked and admired and really enjoyed, but there are no new gay characters that people like. People like Midnighter Apollo. People like Constantine. People even like Batwoman. But anytime a new writer gets onto it nowadays, it's the same thing over and over, and they're never actually able to be fully actualized and realized as a character. They can only be one fucking note nowadays, and that's why a lot of fans, including a lot of gay fans, I hear from them as well, are very, very frustrated with the state of DC Comics. Don't take characters that are already established as one way and change them over there because you want representation. And if you are going to do that, you better make it fucking count and actually do something that warrants the change. And they never do that. They just take stuff that's somewhat working. In the case of Iceman, certainly working. In the case of Tim Drake Robin, working enough as a member of the Bat family. Was never going to have his own ongoing series. It gets up to 100 issues. But there are very few members of the Bat family that can do that outside of Batman himself. Obviously, Nightwing being like the best example out there. But what happened with Nightwing in the past? How did that character really come into his own? You had George Perez and Marv Wolfman. New Teen Titans, first appearance of Nightwing, fleshing out the character. Who takes over after that and really elevates Nightwing? Chuck fucking Dixon. You had really good creative that was incentivized to do the best job that they can with the character to make fucking money. These new writers aren't incentivized like that. They are incentivized with social currency. They are incentivized with attaboys and high fives and you go girls nowadays. You made a character gay. You go. You finally did it. You're going to get an article in Coming Out magazine or whatever it is or whatever. They're never getting paid for this kind of stuff. So back in the past, when you wanted to fully realize and make a character unique, you had people capable of doing it. Nobody's capable of doing that nowadays. And even if they were, they're not incentivized to do it. And they're not allowed to. DC Comics editorial will never allow Tim Drake to be anything other than what he is nowadays. You know it, I know it, but apparently the dude at CBR absolutely is completely fucking oblivious to it. But it's the same thing that happened to John Kent. It's the same thing that happened, obviously, to Bobby Drake. It's the same thing that happens over and over again. Alan Scott. You know, these characters get bogged down with this new identity and can be nothing else other than a stereotypical version of that thing from now until eternity. They will never be allowed to change it. I do appreciate your time here. If you appreciate what I'm doing here on Think Critical YouTube, the perspective, the news and all that kind of stuff, the analysis that I do, and you would like to support me, I do want to invite you to come visit me on Think Critical Patreon. That's the best way to do that. We are a very small channel here on YouTube trying to stand out in a sea of other voices out there and trying to shine a spotlight on a lot of the bad things that are happening in comic books that could be fixed very, very easily, including the Tim Drake problem. If you'd like to support us, there's a link in the video description. I hope to see you there very, very soon.